Laurel Canyon, 1971. The house party was winding down, smoke hanging in the air like unfinished conversations. It was past 2 in the morning, and the energy had shifted from celebration to something more intimate, more honest. The people who remained were the ones who had nowhere else to be, or who wanted to stay for one more song, one more story, one more moment before returning to whatever waited for them in the morning. Joni Mitchell sat at the piano in the corner, playing something new, something raw. Her fingers moved across the keys with the confidence of someone who had stopped caring whether anyone was listening. She was working through a melody that had been haunting her for days, trying to catch it before it disappeared. Marvin Gaye stood by the window, watching the Los Angeles lights flicker in the distance, a glass of cognac untouched in his hand. He'd been standing there for nearly half an hour, perfectly still, existing in that particular kind of solitude that's only possible in a room full of people who've forgotten you're there. Someone had put on What's Going On earlier in the evening. Marvin had left the room when he heard the opening notes. He always did. Listening to his own music felt like watching footage of someone else's life, someone who looked like him but wasn't really him. Joni had stayed and listened with the critical ear of a craftsman studying another's work. Beautiful, she thought, sophisticated. The arrangements were lush, the vocals impeccable, every element perfectly placed. But something bothered her about it, something she couldn't name until now, in the quiet aftermath of the party, with Marvin alone by the window and her own confessional music still echoing in her fingers. "Marvin," she said, her fingers still moving across the keys. "Can I ask you something?" He turned from the window. "Of course. Your album, it's stunning. The arrangements, the vocals, the production." She paused, searching for the right words. "But it's so polished, so perfect. Where's the mess? Where's the imperfection?" Marvin didn't respond immediately. He'd heard variations of this critique before, usually from people who confused rawness with authenticity. White critics especially loved to talk about keeping it real, as if pain had a correct vocabulary. Joni continued, emboldened by his silence. "Real emotion is messy. It's uncontrolled. But you smooth everything out, the strings, the vocals, even the pain. It sounds produced, manufactured. It sounds dishonest." The room had gone quiet. Other guests pretended not to listen while hanging on every word. Someone in the kitchen turned off the faucet. The house seemed to hold its breath. Marvin walked slowly to the piano, each step deliberate. He set down his glass with a soft clink. "You think I'm hiding," he said softly. "I think you're afraid to be ugly," Joni replied, meeting his eyes. "I think you use beauty as a shield." He smiled, but there was no humor in it, just recognition. "You write poetry about your pain because you can name it, because you can look at it directly and describe what you see. Blue, a river, a case of you." He gestured at the piano. "You make art from your wounds because your wounds have language." Joni's hand stopped moving. "I produce mine," Marvin continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "because I can't even look at them directly. Every string arrangement, every vocal layer, every perfect note, it's not polish, it's protection." He sat beside her at the piano, close enough that she could see the exhaustion around his eyes that no amount of stage presence could hide. "Play something for me, something personal." Joni played the opening chords of River. It was stark, unadorned, confessional. When she sang, her voice cracked in places, not by accident, but by design. The melody wandered like someone lost. She sang about wanting to escape, about wishing she had a river to skate away on. The imperfection was intentional, calculated to sound uncalculated. When she finished, Marvin nodded slowly. "Beautiful. You expose yourself and call it honesty. You're brave enough to show your mess because your mess is bearable to look at." "And yours isn't?" Joni asked, feeling the sting of being analyzed in return. Marvin played a few notes, his fingers finding a familiar pattern. "You ever notice that my songs never really talk about what they're about? Let's Get It On sounds like seduction, but it's actually about desperation, desperate to feel something other than empty. What's Going On sounds political, but it's really about feeling helpless." He continued playing, the melody simple and almost childlike under his hands. I can't sing I'm lonely the way you do. Can't sing I'm broken. If I did that, if I just said it plain, I'd have to acknowledge it's true. And if it's true, then I'd have to do something about it, or admit I can't. His voice had dropped even lower, and Joni found herself leaning in to hear him. So I arrange 30 strings to say it for me. I layer vocals until the loneliness sounds like harmony. I make the desperation sound like seduction, not to fool anyone, to survive the song myself. He started playing What's Going On stripped down, just the melody, no production. The chords were simple, almost childlike. Without the production, this song is just me asking questions I don't have answers to. It's just me feeling small and scared and unable to fix anything. His fingers moved across the keys. So I add the saxophone, the strings, the background vocals, not to hide the feeling, to make it bearable enough to survive. Joni listened, and for the first time she heard what she'd been missing. The Polish wasn't vanity. It wasn't commercial calculation. It was survival architecture. Every lush arrangement, every perfect vocal run, they were load-bearing walls holding up something that would otherwise collapse. You make your pain into poetry, Marvin said, standing up from the piano. I make mine into protection. You expose, I contain. Neither one is more honest than the other. They're just different strategies for living with things we can't fix. He walked back to the window. You asked where the mess is? It's everywhere. It's in every perfect note, every lush arrangement, every smooth vocal run. The mess isn't the sound. It's what the sound is trying to hold back. Joni sat in silence for a long moment, her hands resting on the piano keys without pressing them. She thought about all the times she'd stripped her music down to its bones, believing that rawness equaled truth. Then quietly, I accused you of hiding. You did. I was wrong. Marvin picked up his cognac, finally taking a sip. No, you were right. I am hiding. But not because I'm afraid to show the truth. Because I'm afraid of what happens if I stop holding it together. He turned back to face her. What happens when the production stops? What's left? The question hung in the air, unanswered. He walked back to the window. The party had resumed its low hum of conversation and laughter, but neither of them seemed to notice. The city below sparkled with 10,000 lives that had nothing to do with music or pain. Your honesty is a choice, Marvin said, staring out at the city. My production is a reflex. When you write about pain, you're choosing to share it. When I produce mine into something beautiful, I'm choosing to survive it. Joni joined him at the window. I spent years trying to strip everything down to the bone. No pretense, no production, just raw truth. And that works for you. But you can't do that. No. Why not? Marvin was quiet for so long that Joni thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. Because if I stripped away the strings, the arrangements, the smooth vocals, if I just sang what I actually feel with no protection, I wouldn't make it to the end of the song. The admission hung in the air between them like something sacred. Joni had spent her entire career believing that artistic honesty meant exposure, that truth required vulnerability in its rawest form. But standing next to Marvin, she understood something she'd never considered. Some people's truth is so heavy that they need architecture to carry it. I'm sorry, she said. Marvin shook his head. Don't be. You're doing it your way. I'm doing it mine. The world needs both. But even as he said it, Joni could hear the weariness in his voice, the exhaustion of someone who had to construct beauty just to contain pain. She wrote her suffering into songs and felt lighter. Marvin arranged his into perfection and carried it forever. Years later, in 1985, Joni Mitchell gave an interview about songwriting. The interviewer asked about artistic honesty and whether production could be authentic. I used to think raw meant real, Joni said. I used to think production was a form of dishonesty. Then I met someone who taught me that some people's pain is so overwhelming that they need to make it beautiful just to survive it. Who was that? The interviewer asked. Marvin Gaye, Joni said quietly. He didn't polish his pain to hide it. He polished it to survive it. I exposed mine because I could bear to look at it. He produced his because he couldn't. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I thought he was hiding. Turns out he was protecting himself. My honesty was a choice. His production was armor. And when he died, I realized something. I get to keep making music because my pain doesn't kill me. His did, because you can only carry that much weight in beautiful arrangements for so long before something breaks. The interviewer waited, but Joni had nothing more to say. Back in Laurel Canyon, 1971, the party had ended. Guests had filtered out into the night, leaving behind empty glasses and full ashtrays. The house felt larger in their absence, each room echoing with conversations that had ended hours ago. Marvin stood alone at the piano, playing the same simple melody from earlier. The melody he'd shown Joni, the bare bones of what's going on without any protection. No strings, no production, just the bare, unbearable truth of it. He played it once, slowly, letting each note hang in the air, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed felt enormous, oppressive. It filled the room like water. Joni, watching from the doorway, understood now. This was what Marvin carried every day, this naked, unbearable question hanging in the air, with no answer, no resolution, no comfort. And the only way he could share it with the world was to dress it in something beautiful enough to bear. She left quietly, letting him sit alone with his questions. It felt wrong to witness this, like seeing someone without their armor, without their permission. Outside, the canyon was dark and still. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out. Joni got in her car and drove home through empty streets, thinking about honesty and armor, exposure and survival. She would go on to make more albums, each one more confessional than the last. She would strip her music down further and further, believing that rawness equaled truth. Blue would come just months later, every wound exposed, every vulnerability on display. And it would work for her. People would call it brave. They would call it honest. And it was. Marvin would go on to make more albums too, each one more lush and produced than the last. He would add more strings, more layers, more beauty. Not because he was afraid of honesty, but because honesty without protection would destroy him. Let's Get It On would sound like seduction, but mean desperation. Every perfect note holding back a scream. Two artists, two approaches, both trying to make sense of pain too large for simple words, both succeeding in their own way, both surviving as long as they could. But only one of them needed the music to survive. And in 1984, when Marvin Gaye died one day before his 45th birthday, shot by his father in the same house where he'd grown up, Joni Mitchell understood, finally and completely, what he had been trying to tell her that night in Laurel Canyon. Some people's mess isn't in the imperfections of their art. It's in the desperate perfection they need to construct just to keep breathing, just to make it through one more song. The polish wasn't the lie. The polish was the only truth he could afford to tell.